I'm David, a 21-year-old Southern California native. I work for a small pool cleaning and maintenance company that is fairly busy all year round. It's not exactly a profession to brag about at parties, but I really enjoy it. It keeps me busy, pays my bills, and allows me to spend most of my days outside enjoying the sun. The majority of my labor consists of scooping debris, regulating chemical levels, and ensuring that everything in the system operates well. Nothing flashy, just clean, honest labor, which I've gotten good at. I take delight in walking away from a crystal-clear pool. That morning started off like any other. My manager forwarded a fresh service ticket to my phone. The address was in a high-end neighborhood I was familiar with, but had never worked in. You know the kind. Big homes, immaculate landscaping, and sparkling, expensive automobiles in the driveway. Definitely rich people's territory. The note stated that the client needed dirt cleared, chemicals adjusted, and a basic system check. Should be simple. I packed my gear into the vehicle, entered the address into my GPS, and drove away with my normal playlist blasting over the speakers. But as I pulled into the long, winding driveway, my jaw tightened slightly. The mansion was huge, Spanish style, with towering hedges, clean white stucco walls, and hefty black iron gates. I parked next to a gleaming new Range Rover, grabbed my clipboard, and took a deep breath before walking up to the front door. Knocked once, and after a few seconds, the door swung open. That was when I first saw her. She appeared to be in her early 40s, yet something about her made that number seem odd. She was tall and slim, the type of tone that only comes from years of morning Pilates and a healthy diet. Her wavy chestnut hair was tied back loosely, and she wore a flowing white top and fitting linen slacks, barefoot with polished toenails. That caught the light. Everything about her seemed effortless, graceful, but grounded. Delicate features mixed with a quiet confidence. Then her green eyes met mine for a brief moment, causing me to realize I was gazing. "Hello, you must be David," she remarked with a warm smile that seemed surprisingly genuine. "Come in, I am Susan." "Yes, David." "Pool service," I said nervously, holding up my clipboard as if it proved I belonged there. Typically, clients simply pointed to the backyard and returned inside without a second glance. But not Susan. She stood aside and motioned for me to come as a guest, not only to assist. "Do you want something to drink first? Coffee, water, or lemonade?" She offered nonchalantly, as if we already knew each other. I blinked, taken off guard. I almost answered no, simply out of habit. But the way she asked helped me relax a little. "Lemonade sounds nice. Thanks." She took me through a bright, open living room filled with natural light and abstract artwork that were likely more expensive than my truck. We strolled out onto the back patio, and I noticed the pool, which was truly stunning. Huge and crystal clear, surrounded by palm trees and pristine white loungers. I set down my tools as she returned with a big glass filled with condensation. "Here you go," she said, passing it to me. "It's already toasty outside. I didn't want you to think you were merely work. I admire folks who work hard." I gave a quick, hesitant laugh and thanked her, unsure how to answer. We remained there for a few seconds, locked in that awkward silence before someone decides what to say next. "You have a lovely place," I volunteered, mainly to fill the stillness. "Thank you," she responded with a sweet grin on her lips. It has been a long project. I created my profession, made excellent money, bought the house I wanted, and now I'm trying to figure out what comes next. She let out a small laugh, then her voice softened. "I now live here alone. Sometimes it gets quiet. I like having folks around, even if they are simply passing through." Her candor threw me off guard. Most of my clients could barely recall my name. Susan seemed to enjoy a little human interaction. I gave a polite nod, unsure of what to say. "Well, I should probably get started," I remarked, setting down the lemonade. "Of course, I'll let you work," she responded with a smile, taking a step back, but not leaving. I put on my gloves, flipped the skimmer into the water, and went to work. To be honest, the pool required very little maintenance, only a few leaves, and flower petals drifted down the edge. This is my favorite aspect of the job, getting into the flow of things. Just me, the sun on my shoulders, and the soft sound of water hitting the tiles. I examined the chemical levels, washed the walls, and checked the filters. All normal procedures. The normal routine helped to relieve the strange anxiety I had felt earlier. Still, every now and then, I would look up and see Susan nearby, pacing while on the phone, reading on a lounger, or keeping an extra close eye on me. I convinced myself. I was dreaming it, shook it off, and focused on my work. About an hour later, I was crouching near the pump controls, wiping off the housing, when I noticed a shadow go across me. I looked up. Susan stood there, arms folded carelessly, her smile relaxed and humorous. She joked with a chuckle in her voice. "You really take your job seriously." "I try to do it correctly," I murmured, smiling as I rose up and dusted my hands. Against my shorts, she made a little step forward. The air between us felt suddenly heavier and warmer. I could smell her perfume, which was light and lemony, and didn't need to gloat about its high price. Then she leaned in slightly, barely detectable, and muttered in a low enough voice that only I could hear, "You're making it difficult for me to behave." I froze for a second. My mind raced, trying to figure out if I'd actually heard what I believed I did. There was a little smirk pulling at the corner of her lips, and her green eyes gleamed as if she knew precisely what reaction she was getting. I let out a nervous laugh and tried to hide it with a crooked smile. I'll just finish verifying the system." She laughed softly and turned back to her lounge chair, walking with a determined swing that no longer felt accidental. I stood there for a beat longer than I probably should have, then snapped out of it and returned my focus to the pump readings. My fingers remained steady, but my thoughts were racing. What did she mean by that? Was she joking? Is this a test for me? Are you just playing around, or was she serious? I shook my head, took a quiet breath, and attempted to laugh it off. I had a job to complete, but deep down, I knew it wasn't going to be a normal day. The remainder of the afternoon dragged by, not because the work was difficult, but because my mind kept replaying that scene over and over. I kept urging myself to stay smart and professional. But every time I saw her laid out in a lounger, sunglasses on, browse lazily through a magazine, that statement came back to mind. "You are making it difficult for me to be good." I wasn't sure if she meant it or if it was simply harmless banter. I did not want to jump to conclusions. One false move, and I could lose my job, or worse. So I maintained my distance. I stayed focused and completed the chemical treatments, checked the pump, and cleaned the filters exactly as I would in any other home. I was rinsing my tools by the side gate when I heard footsteps behind me. Susan responded in a friendly and relaxed tone. "You really take your work seriously." I turned around. She stood a few feet away, arms spread loosely across her chest, the wind playing with her hair. I attempted to execute the task correctly, I said. "Keep it simple, I can tell," she murmured, holding my stare for somewhat longer than usual. She tilted her head slightly. "Would you mind coming inside for a minute before you leave?" Hesitated before adding, "I made dinner. It would be a shame to let it go to waste. I made enough for 2 people. It's just a short thank you for your politeness and professionalism." I halted. Normally, I kept a clear line between business and personal matters, but her tone was so gentle. No pressure, no strange emotions, just real friendliness. I would not want to impose. It wouldn't be. She replied with a sweet smile. "The truth is, I don't have much company these days." I stood there weighing it for a second. Then my stomach reminded me that I hadn't eaten since morning. The prospect of a real home-cooked lunch was becoming more appealing by the second. "Okay," I said finally, "just for a short while." Her expression brightened as she indicated for me to follow her inside. I gathered my belongings, locked up the truck, and entered through the front door. The interior of the mansion was equally spectacular as the exterior. High ceilings, soft neutral walls, exquisite furnishings, and warm lighting made the entire space feel peaceful and welcoming. You could tell that someone lived there. Framed images from her travels adorned one corridor. Fresh flowers sat in a tall vase on the dining table, and beautiful art hung neatly on the walls. She took me into the dining room, where the table was already set for two. A few candles burned quietly, and an unopened bottle of wine sat in the center. The smell of grilled veggies and roasting chicken permeated the air. It made my stomach grumble. "I was really impressed that you didn't have to go through all of this." "Oh, nonsense," she said with a shrug. "Cooking relaxes me. I enjoy it." I sat down awkwardly, feeling like a guy who neglected to change after work, which I obviously had. Susan brought over 2 plates and poured us both sparkling water. And for the first time that day, we really spoke. As we ate, I felt myself settle in. Conversation came easily to her. She told me about her work, how she had spent the last 2 decades making a name for herself in real estate. Constantly on the move, always looking for the next big project. "I never really settled down," she admitted with a soft laugh. "It was always about the next transaction, the next milestone. And now I have everything I've always wanted, but no one to share it with." I nodded softly and listened. It was not what I expected to hear from someone who appeared to have everything together. Behind that polished facade, there was a quiet honesty, a loneliness she didn't try to hide. I told her about my own life, how I'd gone into pool work right out of high school, how I enjoyed working outside and keeping things simple, and how I rarely had time for dating or hanging out. Susan laughed softly. "So we're both a little married to our jobs?" Looks like it," I replied, smiling back. We completed supper, and she sat back in her chair, swirling her water and looking over at me. "Can I ask you a question, David?" She spoke, her tone questioning yet calm. "Sure." "Have you ever done anything completely out of character? Something rash or hazardous with someone you hardly knew?" Her question took me off guard. I blinked, not sure how to respond straight away. Honestly, no. I've never really been that type of man. I've always had things to take care of. I generally work long hours," I informed her. "I don't really get out much." Her expression softened slightly as she remarked, "That's a shame. Life is too short not to enjoy it occasionally." I gave a slight shrug and a half smile. "I suppose I've just never made it a priority." Susan bent her head slightly and smiled in that fun manner she had. "Well, maybe tonight is your chance." I stared at her, slightly perplexed, yet fascinated. "What do you mean?" She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the early evening sky. "I don't mean anything wild," she added, turning back to face me. "I just mean relax a little. Try something different, something spontaneous. You're young. Now's the time to truly live, even if it's only for one night." I slumped back in my seat, unsure what to say. "Have you considered spending more time with her outside of work?" It seemed both scary and exciting. Susan returned to the table and reclined against the edge, arms folded loosely across her front. "Look," she continued, "I know I am older, and yes, I am technically your client. This may appear bizarre, but I am not asking for anything unusual or uncomfortable. Just wondering if you're interested in going out." She hesitated for a beat. "Grab a drink, go for a walk by the ocean, and blast some music with the windows down. Just something to shake up the norm. There is no pressure. There's no agenda. Just two people who could certainly need a vacation from the daily grind. I sat there staring at her, thinking, the practical half of me, the part that preferred keeping things simple and safe, advised me to thank her and leave. However, the other side of me, which was tired of the same predictable days, welcomed the notion. I offered her a timid smile. I honestly don't know what to say. She chuckled quietly. Simply say yes or no. I leaned in slightly, putting my elbows on the table. You're right. Yes. Her eyes brightened. Really? Yeah, I replied, nodding. You're correct, and never do anything outside the script. Perhaps it is time I did. Perfect, she exclaimed, clearly excited now. Go home, change out of your work clothes, and return in about an hour. We'll take my automobile. You can park your truck here. Do not worry about it. I nodded slowly, trying to grasp what I had just consented to. All right, I will be returning soon. She escorted me to the door, and as I went outside, she smiled and said, Don't keep me waiting too long, David. I walked back to my pickup, my head churning the entire time. This wasn't even close to how I expected the day to conclude. I started the engine, took one more look at her house, and pulled out of the driveway. 1 hour. That was all I needed. To figure out what I was getting into, the drive back to my flat seemed unreal. I kept rehearsing everything. How the day began like any other job. How soon it transformed into something different, and how I managed to say yes. I parked into the parking lot of my apartment building, got out, and dashed inside. I removed my work clothes, walked up to the mirror, and looked at myself for a moment. What are you doing, David? I mumbled. Nonetheless, I put on my best jeans, a clean black t-shirt, and the nicest sneakers I had. I sprayed on a small amount of cologne, just enough to be noticeable, but not overpowering. I ran my fingers through my hair, examined the clock. Time was ticking. By the time I returned to Susan's area, the sun had already set behind the hills. The sky was illuminated in a lovely orange hue. Her silver convertible sat in the driveway, top down, shimmering in the soft light. I parked my truck, got out, and walked up to the front door. Before I could knock, the door flung open. Susan stood there in tight jeans, a light, airy shirt, and sandals. Her hair hung just below her shoulders, catching the final rays of sunlight. And I detected a faint whiff of her perfume as she smiled. She looked stunning and effortless, as if the evening had been waiting for her. She greeted you warmly. I was beginning to suspect he'd back out. Not yet, I said with a grin. She chuckled, took her small leather pocketbook from the table, and said, Come on, let's leave here. We walked to the car together, and I got into the passenger seat. The leather felt cool beneath me, and a gentle wind blew in from the open road. She started the car, reversed down the driveway, and drove down the twisting seaside road as if she knew every curve by heart. Neither of us spoke much at first. The music was low, just enough to fill the silence. The final rays of sunshine shimmered across the ocean, throwing streaks of gold and pink through the windshield. She finally remarked, I don't do things like this very often. I admitted that I didn't either. That's exactly why I wanted to, she remarked, looking over at me with a slight smile. Sometimes all you need to do is remind yourself that life is more than simply schedules and duties. I nodded slowly. I wasn't sure if this was a date or just two people fleeing the monotony of their life. I wasn't in a hurry to figure it out. Our first destination was a small beachfront pub she recognized, nestled between a souvenir shop and an old ice cream stand. As we came in, I felt a little underdressed among the stylish crowd, but Susan strode in like she owned the place. We picked a booth near the window, and a bartender approached us and offered her a glass of white wine. And me a Coke. The talk resumed as usual, with ease. We ended up chatting about everything, including our disappointments growing up in California, awkward first jobs, and humiliating high school recollections that we definitely should have forgotten. Somewhere along the line, I stopped thinking about how unusual the evening had begun. Susan had a knack of making you feel as if there was nowhere else you should be. By the time we left the pub, the night air had chilled and carried the salty aroma of the ocean. The street around us buzzed gently with music, laughter, and the distant sound of waves crashing on the shore. "Are you tired?" she asked, as she unlocked the car. "Not really." I said. "Good," she said with a grin. "I have one more spot I want to take you." We drove out of town, the highway hugging the coastline in the darkness, headlights lighting the way ahead. About 15 minutes later, she turned off onto a peaceful overlook. The moonlight illuminated the limitless, glittering sea below. We found a wooden bench near the edge and sat down, gazing out at the water. The regular cadence of the waves was soothing, and for long we didn't say anything. Then she spoke. "Do you know the actual reason I invited you out tonight?" I turned to look at her, inquisitive. "It's because I haven't laughed like this in a long time," she explained softly. "I've spent so much of my life erecting barriers, keeping everyone at a distance." She paused, but tonight seemed effortless. I didn't know what to say, so I simply nodded slowly. She stared at me again. Are you having a nice time?" I smiled. "Yes, I truly am." I honestly did not expect to come, but I am glad I did. Susan leaned back and tightened her light jacket around herself. "I realize this seems crazy, but I needed it," she explained quietly. "I needed to feel alive again. So thank you." I glanced at her for a few seconds, and we just stared at each other. There was nothing overtly romantic about it. Simply a peaceful understanding between two individuals who did not come from the same world, but ended up here on the same page for one night. We stayed a little longer, chatting about life, how rapidly it moves, what we would have done differently, and what we still wanted. Our words flowed naturally, like the water beneath us. Susan eventually got up and stretched her arms. "Come on, let us go back. I don't want to keep you out too late." We returned to the car, and the ride home was calm and quiet. The city lights twinkled in the distance, and for once, silence felt natural. When we arrived in her driveway, she shut off the engine and looked across at me. "I had a really good time tonight," she replied softly. "Me too," I said. She hesitated for a moment, before smiling again. "I know I said no pressure, no expectations, and I meant it, but would you like to come in for a moment? I made coffee earlier. If you prefer tea, it is also an option." I glanced at her and tried to read her expression. There was no pressure or suggestion, only warmth and a slight reluctance to let the night end. "Sure," I replied. "Coffee sounds nice." We both stepped outside and headed approached the front door, the porch light creating a beautiful glow on us. Was going to happen next? And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't obsessed about it. I was simply present, living in it. When we stepped inside, the house was quiet. Dim lighting generated a soothing warmth, and the subtle aroma of fresh coffee lingered in the air. Susan indicated for me to sit at the large kitchen island as she fetched 2 cups from the cabinet. "Do you take it black or with everything?" she asked while pouring. "Black is perfect," I said. She pushed a steaming coffee over to me and leaned on the opposite side of the counter, looking me through the rim of her cup. I clasped my hands around mine, feeling the warmth settle into my fingertips after the frigid night air. "I'm so delighted you came tonight," she said, her voice softer. "You're not like most folks." I chuckled a little. "How is that?" "You actually listened," she stated. "You were not staring at your phone or pretending to care. You were merely present." I offered her a timid smile. Perhaps it's because I don't get many opportunities to simply converse with someone. Work keeps me moving. She nodded. "Yes, I understand it more than you might imagine." We sipped our coffee and let the discussion drift again. We chatted about odd topics like the craziness of LA traffic, which taco truck was the finest, and how neither of us understood the avocado toast trend. It was easy, comfortable. Even though we had just recently met, it felt like we were old friends catching up after years apart. As the clock ticked past midnight, I rose up and stretched my back. "I should probably start going," I said. "I have to get up early." Susan hesitated for a second before offering a sweet grin. "I was hoping you would remain a little longer." I halted. "What do you mean?" She laughed gently, noticing the surprise on my face. "Relax, not like that." She walked over to the large glass doors leading to the backyard and slid them open. The night breeze blew in, cold and clean. I was considering doing something a little wild, something I hadn't done in years. I raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" Susan turned slightly, peeked over her shoulder, and gave me an inquisitive look. "Come on," she urged, motioning for me to follow her out. We strolled out into the backyard, where the pool's surface shone like glass in the moonlight. Susan removed her sandals and carefully dipped her toes in the water at the edge. "I used to enjoy late-night swims," she said, with a gentle, wistful breath. "But it has been years. Always too busy. Always planning for the next day." "You mentioned before that you don't do outrageous things," she continued with a teasing look. "Neither do I. So what are you saying?" I hesitated, unsure. "You mean to go swimming right now?" She grinned. "Why not?" I gave out a hesitant laugh. "I don't precisely own a bikini." She gave a nonchalant shrug. "Neither do I, but who cares? We'll keep things decent, simply roll up your jeans and put your feet in." Something in me shifted. Then that part of me that had been buried under routine and obligation had finally awakened. And without thinking too much, I kicked off my shoes, took off my socks, rolled up my jeans, and sat next to her at the pool's edge. I dipped my legs in the chilly water. It was crisp, clean, and immediately invigorating. Susan gave a soft sigh of happiness. "See, doesn't it feel amazing?" "It does," I confessed. "You were correct." We sat there for a long time, just the two of us, legs in the water, eyes focused on the sky. Crickets chirped in the distance. An odd automobile buzzed past, and the quiet spray of water across the tiles broke the silence between us. Then she spoke in a low, serious tone. For the first time in a long time, I simply stopped. No meetings, no emails. There is no schedule, just this. I turned to look at her. The moonlight captured the contour of her face, softening her appearance. She appeared calm, in stark contrast to the polished, serene woman who had opened the door earlier that afternoon. I admitted that I rarely slow down. It feels strange, yet in a positive way. She turned to face me, her green eyes quiet but honest. "I realize this seems strange. David, I understand we live in separate worlds. What about tonight?" "Tonight has been the most fun I've had in years." I gave her a slight smile. "Same here." We didn't talk for a while, just letting the silence settle in, until Susan stood up and shook her legs. "Okay," she replied. "Before I lose all feeling in my toes, I have one final offer." I rose up, putting my shoes back on. "What type of offer?" She folded her arms, playful, and her eyes danced. "I have a crazy idea. You are free to say no. There will be no hard feelings." "But what if we don't finish the night here?" I raised an eyebrow. "You intend to keep going?" She nodded. "Yeah, like if we were two teens with nothing to worry about in the morning. Grab a blanket and head down to the beach to watch the sunrise." Her suggestion astonished me, but it seemed so genuine. "Are you serious?" she said completely. "You told me you never did stuff like this." "I don't either, so why not breach the rule only this once?" I took a time to consider, but to be honest, I already knew the answer. "Okay," I replied, smiling. "Let's do it." Her entire face lit up with delight, realistic, almost infantile. "Perfect," she smiled. "I will fetch the blanket." A few minutes later, we were pulling out of her driveway with a blanket in the trunk and a thermos of hot coffee between us. The streets were silent. One of those rare, calm nights when the world seems to be holding its breath. Neither of us said much as she drove down the Pacific Coast Highway. The wind blasted through the open windows, capturing her hair as the headlights flashed over the dark road. I watched the white lines disappear beneath the tires and felt a sense of liberation I hadn't experienced in a long time. When we arrived at the beach, it was dark and desolate. The moonlight reflected off the waves, leaving silver stripes in the beach. We laid the blanket down and sat close together, shielding ourselves from the chilling sea breeze. The ocean roared and rolled in front of us, and we sat there listening and watching the sky gradually transform from black to indigo. With a tiny hint of gold on the horizon, Susan gently leaned into me and rested her head on my shoulder. "Thank you for this," she muttered. "I truly needed it." I looked out at the open water and grinned. I agree. The sun gently rose over the ocean, putting a beautiful golden light on the waves. We sat quietly, watching the world wake up. Her head remained on my shoulder, and I did not move. I did not want her to. I had never seen a sunrise like that before, and especially not with someone like her. I wasn't sure what this meant or what would happen next, but for once, I wasn't concerned about any of that. Susan eventually got up, rubbing her arms to get rid of the cold, and gave me a tired grin. "We should probably go back. Don't forget, you have work," she teased. I chuckled. "Yeah, my boss is going to believe I disappeared." She stood and dusted the sand from her pants as I helped fold the blanket. We went back to the car together, still silent, not because things were awkward, but because neither of us wanted to disrupt the serene spell. The journey back was gentle and still. Susan rested one hand on the steering wheel and the other on her lap as the city reappeared in view. I glanced out at the coast as we drove, still trying to process everything that had transpired in the previous 12 hours. By the time we pulled into her driveway, the early haze had burned off beneath the brilliant California sun. I got out of the car, grabbed my backpack from the back seat, and turned toward her. "Thanks for last night," I said, and meant it. "I've never done anything like that before." Susan grinned and casually placed her arms on the top of the car door. "You are the one who deserves thanks. I haven't felt more alive in years." We stood there in silence for a minute, neither of us wanting to be the first to say goodbye. Then she spoke, her voice softer than usual. "Look," she said, her eyes locked on mine. "I know you have a life. It's your job, and I have mine." She waited for a second, carefully selecting her words. "I'm not seeking for anything significant. No expectations, no titles. But if you ever want to see me again, and you have the time, I would appreciate that. There is no pressure." I grinned slowly. I would enjoy that as well. Her smile deepened, and her eyes became somewhat warmer. "Good. Now get going before you're late." I nodded and walked toward my pickup. But halfway there, I paused and turned around. "Hello, Susan." "Yeah. Is it cool if I text you later?" She laughed softly, leaning against the automobile with a mischievous expression. "You are better." I grinned, waved, and got into my pickup. Driving to my next job seemed surreal. I felt like I was drifting through a dream that I hadn't really woken up from. I kept thinking about how an ordinary weekday had transformed into one of the most unexpected and memorable nights of my life. I even caught myself checking my phone, half expecting her to text me before I concluded my next conversation. Over the next few months, something unspoken began to emerge between us. Nothing is official, no huge discussions, But every now and then, after a long day, I would stop by. We sometimes grabbed dinner. Other times, we sat by her pool, feet in the water, talking till the stars appeared. Some nights, we'd hop in the car and drive up the coast, with the windows down and the music turned low, exactly like the first time. We've always kept it simple. We agreed from the beginning that we did not want to complicate matters. No labels. There is no pressure. There are no strings. There was no jealousy. There's no drama. Just two folks that actually enjoyed being near each other. I never informed anyone about Susan, not my workplace or my friends. It wasn't really a secret. It was just ours, private, quiet, untouched by the outer world. And maybe that's why it was so important. Months passed, but not much changed. I continued working my customary route, mending pumps and removing leaves. And every now and then, I would receive a note from her. If you're available, please stop by. I have wine or coffee. I always did. Now, sitting here recalling that day, entering her location into my GPS, driving up that long road, hearing her voice tease me beside the pool, I still smile. I didn't realize it at the time, but that day would change my life in subtle ways. We never were a couple in the classic sense. We never introduced each other to our friends or met their families. But for a while, we were better. We were two people who filled the voids in each other's lives without attempting to own them. Even now, I occasionally receive messages from her, and when I do, I recall everything. She laughed. The silver convertible. A blanket on the seashore. The way the sunlight illuminated her hair. But most of all, I recall how it all began. One sentence, spoken with a smirk and a spark in her eye. You are making it difficult for me to be good.